Today, we are going to do the webinar on the TAPVC cath meet. The main aim is to train the PG students. Previously, we had the recordings for the angiograms of the TAPVC along with the 2D echo with eminent professor Dr. Vijayalakshmi Madam. Today, we requested Dr. Anita Madam, professor of the cardiology from the AIMS Institute. So we have the privilege of having a teaching by a greatest teacher. Along with me, Dr. Lalita she's an associate professor working in the Nizam Institute of Medical Sciences. So all three of us are going to discuss this. I will request Dr. Lalita to start the presentation, please. Dr. Lalita?
Yes, please. We start with the clinical history. This is a 1-year-old male child who presented with history of recurrent lower respiratory tract infection. There is history of congestive heart failure episodes since the age of 3 months. There was difficulty in feeding, poor weight gain history of breathlessness since the age of 3 months. Coming to the birth history, the child was born out of non-consanguineous marriage. It was a full-time normal vaginal delivery. The child has an elderly sibling who is normal. So with this short history, I would request one of the, either Anita Madam or Josna Madam, to discuss the symptoms and what could be the possible diagnosis at this stage.
Yeah, I think basically the 1-year-old child who came with a recurrent respiratory tract infection from the 1 month onwards with the features of the congestive cardiac failure. In the infancy, the congestive cardiac failure is mainly diagnosed by the presence of the failure of the weight gain in infancy and the shortness of breath and the labored breathing and forehead and head sweating along with the suck, rest, suck cycle. So probably that history of the during neonatal period and the other part of the infancy might have been much more helpful. As we already know, usually the normal child is able to take the breast milk with continuously for nearly 20 minutes. When there is a congestive cardiac failure, either because of the cyanotic or acyanotic congenital heart diseases, the deoxygenated blood will prevent them to use the more energy consuming process of taking the feeding. So they will stop sometime. Suppose the 2 minutes they suck it, 2 minutes they take the rest, and again the 2 minutes they may start sucking. Sometimes if this the rest period is prolonged, they may go for a sleep also. So the rest suck rest cycle is a classical for the congestive cardiac failure, which is an important physiological status of the child will be evaluated by that history. Anyway, even though that is lacking with the recurrent respiratory tract infections and this congestive cardiac failure, which is occurred at the before the age of the 3 months, that is the conclusion from the history what I am able to. And can I request Anita Madam to say that when we say that current respiratory tract, lower respiratory tract infections.
So I think that is a very, very important question, because generally when you ask mother this history of respiratory infection, they tend to count the upper respiratory infections also, which are far, far more common than lower respiratory tract infections. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are. Please go ahead.
Okay, so when we ask for history of respiratory infections, I think we have to ensure that we are not confusing the upper respiratory from lower respiratory, because upper respiratory infections, even 6 or 7 in a year, are considered normal. But if it is lower respiratory infection, then more than 3 in 1 year are considered as abnormal, in the first year of life as abnormal. So we have to ask for history of tachypnea, we have to ask for contractions, and we have to ask for any high fever or even history of hospitalization with injections, injectable antibiotics sometimes. So lower respiratory infection needs to be differentiated. That's number one. Number two, 3 or more should be, more than 3 should be considered as abnormal recurrent respiratory infection. So I have seen very often that students tend to get confused between upper respiratory and lower respiratory. I think that is something which needs to be sorted out with the parents very, very carefully.
Okay. So for the sake of the students, a recurrent lower respiratory tract infection is occurrence of 3 in a year, more than 2 in 6 months, or 3 in any type. Okay, in any lifetime. And when we mean a lower respiratory tract infection, ideally, yes, if we can justify that it requires a hospitalization and requires IV antibiotics. Okay, so that was about the lower respiratory tract infection. What of the CHF? How to diagnose CHF in the child? Already, Jyotsna madam has told of some symptoms. How do you assess the feeding habits?
So basically, I think what Dr. Jyotsna said about suck, rest, suck cycle, that is very, very important. Also, I think a lot of parents will probably give a history that when they're putting the baby on their chest, then they can feel the breathing very fast or faster than usual. So history of tachypnea, history of subcostal retractions. That also sometimes patients can tell that, you know, there is a depression below the rib cage. So history of retractions, more so after feeding, history of tachypnea, suck, rest, suck cycle, loss of, or let's say failure to gain weight with time like a normal person. So these are some of these issues or some of these symptoms which will help us to say that this is CHF. Now again, I would like to emphasize that all this can happen because of respiratory infection also. So the parents need to be asked that while the child is or the baby is not having respiratory infection, are these symptoms still present? And if they say yes, these symptoms don't go away, or they may become better, but they don't go away in between the infection also, that would mean that there is a cardiac issue and there is perhaps congestive heart failure. And that will be a history suggestive of heart failure in an infant, especially in an infant under 1 year of age.
So this child has presented with congestive heart failure since the age of 3 months. So, and respiratory tract infection since 1 month. So what are the possible cardiac conditions which can present at this time?
One more thing I want to add about these heart failure scores, causes of the congestive cardiac failure before 3 months of age.
Okay. So I think heart failure, a lot will depend on what age the patient presents with heart failure features. So for example, if there is a heart failure right at birth, then it has different connotation. If there is heart failure at 2 weeks, it's different connotation. If there is heart failure at 1 month, it may be different. So there are causes according to the age of the causes of heart failure. Since this patient seems to have developed or at least has been noticed to have heart failure at 3 months of age, it is likely that he has some serious heart disease, because we know a straightforward ASD doesn't go into failure. Similarly, of course, a large VSD, large PDA, coarctation of aorta and all can produce failure within first 2 or 3 weeks of life or 4 weeks of life. But having CHF at 3 months of age will be a very broad group of conditions, which includes, if there is no cyanosis, then you have to think about a large VSD, you have to think about large PDA, or AV septal defect. But ASD will not produce heart failure unless there is any specific association with ASD. So generally ASD is not a cause. So one thing that you can probably exclude is an ASD. But otherwise, any serious condition like a large VSD, large PDA, or even TAPVC, etc., can produce heart failure at 3 months of age. Generally, transpositions produce heart failure much earlier. So of all the cyanotic heart disease with large pulmonary blood flow, like TGA, single ventricle, DORV, they tend to produce heart failure much earlier in life. And of course, cyanosis is a very prominent feature that should come out in the history of these patients. Since there is no history of cyanosis here, at least, I think we will have to think about more like a large VSD or large PDA, but acyanotic left to right shunt. But a TAPVC can also give you cyanosis. Generally, an obstructive TAPVC will produce heart failure much earlier than an unobstructive TAPVC.
So at this stage with the history, we have a multiple diagnosis. We have the left to right shunts. We also have the cyanotic heart disease with increased pulmonary blood flow. So a history of cyanosis would help us to narrow our diagnosis. Should we move on to the clinical examination?
One more question.
Is the question that how often cyanosis is not...
In the 90% of the saturation, most of the time it is maintained. So that cyanosis can be the missed. Yes.
So having no history of cyanosis doesn't really rule out cyanotic heart disease. That's important. I think conditions like truncus arteriosus, conditions like unobstructive TAPVC, single ventricle, they may have a saturation of as high as 88, 89, 90%. And these patients may not, or the parents may not give you a history of cyanosis. That doesn't rule out. So please do not rule out cyanotic heart diseases with increased pulmonary blood flow if there is no history of cyanosis, especially in an infant up to 3-4 months of age or even 6 months of age. Because many of these patients have a saturation which is not visible, which is not like a visible cyanosis, especially to the parents. Maybe we as pediatric cardiologists will be able to pick it up, but the parents don't pick it up. So they will not come with a history of cyanosis in the child. They will come more with congestive heart failure, recurrent respiratory infections, etc. So this history although suggests a cyanotic heart disease, but doesn't rule out some of the cyanotic heart disease where the pulmonary blood flow is really large and therefore the saturations are good.
Hemlita, can you go to the next slide? So on examination, the child is thin-built and moderately nourished, mild central cyanosis present, no clubbing, no pallor, icterus or pedal edema. On examination, the pulse rate is 120 per minute, regular, normal volume and character. The blood pressure is 90/50, equal in all the 4 arms. And the JVP is normal with a mean column height, where the A wave is equal to the V wave. Next slide, please. On cardiovascular examination, the apex is felt in the left fifth intercostal space in the mid-clavicular right with a grade 2/3 parasternal heave, palpable pulsations in the second heart space and no palpable sounds. On auscultation, the first heart sound is normal. The second heart sound is wide and fixed with a loud P2 and RVS3 is heard. There is a 3/6 harsh medium frequency short ejection systolic murmur occupying about 1/3 of the systole, best heard at the left second intercostal space. There's a mid-diastolic murmur across the tricuspid valve. There are no other murmurs or sounds. Lungs bilateral, respiratory sounds are heard and no adventitious sounds. And per abdomen, there is no organomegaly. So this is the clinical examination of the patient. And the main features in this are presence of central cyanosis, A wave equal to a J wave, V wave. There is an RV apex, parasternal heave with palpable pulmonary artery pulsations. First heart sound is normal and the second sound is wide and fixed. The loud P2 and RVS3 is present. There is an ejection systolic murmur at the pulmonary area and the mid-diastolic murmur across the tricuspid valve. So with these findings, would you like to comment on what could be the first diagnosis?
Finding in this is the cyanosis with the clinical signs of an ASD and moderate pulmonary arterial hypertension. So the major thing, the ASD is substantiated by the JVP, which is not elevated, with the A wave equal to the V wave. And the clinical examination wise, there is an RV apex with flow murmur across the pulmonary valve and flow murmur across the tricuspid valve and with a wide fixed split A2. All these things suggest of ASD. About the moderate PAH is the grade 2 parasternal, grade 2/3 parasternal heave with a palpable pulmonary arterial pulsations and a loud beat. All these things suggestive of the moderate pulmonary arterial hypertension. We can argue between a moderate to the severe pulmonary arterial hypertension because our grade 2/3, but most frequently with the severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, the younger child, we expect a 3/3 of the parasternal heave. So I think it is a cyanosis with the ASD with the moderate pulmonary arterial hypertension. These are the clinical features. So since ASDs are usually doesn't use the cyanosis at this age group because of the Neisser-Winger and that really occurred with the OT. So other conditions which can be clinical signs of ASD with the cyanosis has to be thought of, like TAPVC is the first differential diagnosis for this. The second, common atrium, where you will have the clinical signs of an ASD and the cyanosis, but usually with the other murmurs also along with this, like a left AV wall regurgitation producing a prolonged systolic murmur might have been given a much more better clue. And if it is so, really ASD associated with an MR, then we expect the more prominent V wave than A wave is equal to the V wave. So clinically, I think common atrium comes a little bit lower than that of the TAPVC. And other conditions, if you consider like a cyanosis in a simple ASD, is a simple ASD need not to be always a large enough to have a isolated mineralization and the right to the left shunt, but preferentially the blood from the IVC through the estation valve or the valve goes through the ASD to the left atrium also can produce the cyanosis. And of course, other than the TAPVC, PAPVCs also can have the cyanosis with ASD. Unroofing of the coronary sinus where coronary sinus is directly draining into the left atrium, usually associated with the ASD. There also we can have the clinical ASD, clinical signs of ASD along with the cyanosis. So also anomalous systemic venous connection to the left atrium. I will request Dr. Anita Madam whether she wants to see the ASD with the cyanosis or a cyanosis with the right ventricular apex as a DD for discharge.
So before I proceed, I have a couple of points that I would like to make here. I think this child is 1 year old. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
So usually in infants, I think we are not able to see JVP. So I think JVP is really not something that we bank upon in patients who are so young because they have a very short neck. It is very difficult to put them at 45 degrees. So to say JVP is normal or not normal, and even if it is raised, I think we hardly ever are able to see the JVP. So the features of heart failure in an infant or even up to 2 to 3 years of age are not really JVP. They are tachypnea, tachycardia, and hepatomegaly. So this is how we diagnose CHF at the bedside. That's number one. Now, I didn't see the respiratory rate or subcostal recession in your slide. I don't know if the previous slide showed it or not, but at least this slide doesn't talk about it. Can you go back one slide, or maybe I can just look up the slide? So we are
Actually,
saying
that is not commented on this.
So we are saying pulse rate of 120, but we are not talking about respiratory rate. So I think that is very, very important. If you want to diagnose heart failure in an infant, please talk about respiratory rate, talk about subcostal recession, talk about intercostal recession, and the general dyspnea in the baby. So that is something we have to see. We cannot depend on JVP in an infant, and therefore we don't even look at JVP in these babies because they are usually either lying down or they are in mother's lap. So JVP should not be talked about. Similarly, when we talk about grade 2/3 parasternal heave, RV apex, now these are very nice, when you write it. But when you actually examine a child who's, sort of wriggling and very difficult, it doesn't allow examination. These are very, very difficult, things to pick up. And that's important for students to know because they shouldn't be really spending, they should not be really putting too much money on their clinical findings. This clinical finding. So I would say that if cardiomegaly, tachypnea, presence of tachypnea, cardiomegaly, respiratory discomfort, or let's say subcostal recession, etc., very, very important. And then comes heart sounds and murmurs. Now, if you can make out second heart sound to be wide and fixed split, I think as Dr. Jyotsna has already enumerated, there are few conditions that can give you that kind of a finding of wide and fixed split. Ejection systolic murmur, yes, very easy to hear. Mid-diastolic murmur across the tricuspid also sometimes you can hear, and that goes to show that there is flow murmur. The other thing I would like to highlight is that having a loud P2 is not same as having pulmonary artery hypertension in an ASD. Loud P2 could be a very normal finding in an ASD because of very dilated pulmonary artery, which is anterior, and therefore one should not diagnose pulmonary artery hypertension based on loudness of P2 or even right parasternal heave, because we know right parasternal heave also comes from RV volume overload, which is a part and parcel of ASD. So to diagnose pulmonary artery hypertension in an ASD or a TAPVC is actually only by absence of flow murmurs. So if you have a very loud P2 and you do not have flow murmur, then you should say that there is severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, but not by parasternal heave and not by P2 loudness. I think this patient, if I have to diagnose, I will diagnose because of cyanosis. I'm going to diagnose TAPVC because TAPVC with ASD finding with cyanosis almost goes with TAPVC. And in a 1 year old child who's tachypneic, who's in heart failure, who's minimally blue and has 5 fixed second heart sound and ejection systolic tricuspid flow murmur, we have to make a diagnosis of TAPVC. So since liver is not palpable, that's what it says. So therefore, to say patient is in CHF will not be correct. So we'll have to say patient is not in CHF. And usually when patients are mildly blue, not in CHF, then their TAPVC is likely to be unobstructive TAPVC. So I will go as a first diagnosis clinical as unobstructive TAPVC without pulmonary arterial hypertension or with minimal pulmonary arterial hypertension, and then go on to the other differential diagnosis that Dr. Jyotsna very nicely elucidated.
So at the end of the clinical examination, the first diagnosis is an unobstructed TAPVC with possibly mild to moderate PAH. But as Madam said, the diagnosis of PAH based on loud P2 and parasternal pulsations in a child is not reliable. And can we go to the next slide then? This is the ECG of the child, which is showing normal sinus rhythm of rate around 150 per minute. And there is a right axis deviation of around 150 and clockwise route. There is a right atrial enlargement, RV prominence, RVH without any strain pattern, transition in the V3, V4, no enlargement of the left-sided forces, no left atrial enlargement or LVH. So the positive features in this are right axis deviation, right atrial enlargement, right ventricular enlargement, and no strain pattern, and the absence of any prominence of the left-sided forces. Anita Madam, would you like to comment on the ECG?
So the ECG is quite consistent with the diagnosis. I think the only which will be a little different from a straightforward ASD is absence of incomplete right bundle branch block. Most of the TAPVCs who present early in life, like by about 1 year or before 1 year, usually would have significant RVH without any QRS prolongation. So unlike ASD, there is no incomplete right bundle branch block here. Even the right atrial enlargement, I mean, over here, it's very subtle. I don't think we can really say there is right atrial enlargement, but that's also unusual for TAPVC unless there is a restriction at the ASD level. If there is restriction at the ASD level, then you may get right atrial enlargement even in smaller children. But generally, RA enlargement and incomplete RVH are more suggestive of ASD or a TAPVC in an older patient, in a child or adult. So I think this is quite consistent with TAPVC. But then right axis deviation, right ventricular hypertrophy is consistent with so many other congenital heart diseases that it's not specific for TAPVC.
Can we say it is ASD with PAH on the basis of ECG itself?
So first of all, I would be very hesitant to diagnose ASD and PAH in a 1-year-old child. We know it's very rare to get PAH. But yes, there is a subset of about 5% or less than 5% of infants who may develop PAH in infancy itself. So in them, you will have almost a similar kind of ECG. But I think somebody who has a good tricuspid flow murmur, who has a good ejection systolic murmur, we're not really considering severe pulmonary artery hypertension in such patients because the flow is still large left to right. And therefore, one would not expect ASD-PAH as the underlying diagnosis because in ASD-PAH, you would not have flow murmurs.
And what about the P wave morphology in the case of V1? Usually, small negative wave will be present if that is suggestive of the left atrium, presence of the left atrium. The absence of that says that it is almost a very small left atrium, and that may be the one of the clue for the TAPVC.
I'm not sure because again in very small children we don't actually see much of negative deflection of P wave in V1. I think that's a very subtle point, but I mean I wouldn't really put too much money on it. I would say that none of the atria are actually enlarged in this ECG, and not having a negative left atrium voltage in V1 is quite normal in let's say neonates, for example. Those who have severe right ventricular hypertrophy may not show you that at all. But I wouldn't say that's in favor of TAPVC. That can again happen in any congenital heart disease which produces right ventricular hypertrophy, which are many. Actually, almost all congenital heart disease produce right ventricular hypertrophy and right axis deviation. Very few give you left ventricular. So it's pretty non-specific, I would say.
Is there any importance of the P wave axis in this condition? Do you think that only when you suspect TAPVCs or PAPVCs with the sinus venosus defects, only there is going to be helpful?
So again, abnormal P wave axis would suggest more of ASD. Specific types of ASD like sinus venosus ASD. Generally in TAPVC, P wave axis will be quite normal.
Yeah.
Unless of course there is arrhythmia or something.
Subtotal TAPVCs, where it can be associated with the sinus venosus defects, then probably the P wave is helpful. Or do you think that that association is so rare and
No,
we
no,
need not to worry
absolutely.
about it?
PAPVC with sinus venosus ASD can give you very abnormal P waves. You know, you can get even Krotigit sign, as they call it. So those are conditions which are not associated with cyanosis at all. You know, they are PAPVC is an acyanotic congenital heart disease. It's actually part and parcel of an ASD. So we should not really think of PAPVC and TAPVC as, you know, extreme form of TAPVC is not extreme form of PAPVC. We should think them as two separate diseases altogether. PAPVC is a acyanotic heart disease, TAPVC is a cyanotic heart disease, and PAPVC ASD is left to right, TAPVC ASD is right to left. So these are all totally different conditions, and one should not think that gradation of PAPVC to TAPVC. No.
So this ECG is consistent with the typical TAPVC. What are the other variants on ECG what we can expect in some cases?
So generally, I would say that TAPVC has a very pure ECG, and that's usually right axis deviation with right ventricular hypertrophy without incomplete right bundle branch block. So it's because TAPVC is hardly ever associated with anything. You can have TAPVC associated with AV septal defect. For example, in heterotaxial isomerism, that you may have TAPVC with AV septal defect. In those cases, you may get left axis deviation because of AVSD. Atrioventricular septal defect or endocardial cushion defect or AV canal defect, as we used to call it. But those are really, you know, different kind of patients who have very complex congenital heart disease. They have a VSD, they have an ASD, they have complete atrioventricular septal defect and a TAPVC as a part of right isomerism. But I think in somebody like this patient, when we are just suspecting only TAPVC, I think it will be very classical right axis deviation, right ventricular. If you get something different, like if you get left axis deviation or something, please think of. So I would say that TAPVC isolated is a very pure ECG.
One more thing
you
I
wanted to
wanted
comment
to,
something?
Is that possible that absolutely normal ECG can be seen in the TAPVC? That is one question. And the second one is what the other rare variants where we can see that association with the TOF, like a 4% of the 1 to 4% of the case of the TOF can have the TAPVC. Of course, that is a predominantly will be presentation like a TOF, not as a TAPVC. So, what are those changes then we can expect on the ECG?
So TAPVC TOF is a very, very rare condition, and in them, because of pulmonary stenosis, TAPVC becomes a secondary lesion. So there is no flow murmur, nothing. Features are all that of tetralogy of Fallows, and therefore your ECG is going to show right axis deviation with right ventricular hypertrophy, early transition, like typical tetralogy. What was the second association you were asking?
No. First one is, can be a normal ECG can be possible in TAPVC.
So I think TAPVC should not have a normal ECG. If there is a normal ECG TAPVC, there has to be something associated. Either there is right ventricular hypoplasia or there is AV septal defect or something or the other. So TAPVC, because it is associated with right ventricular volume overload, it has to show you right axis deviation and it has to show right ventricular hypertrophy. So I have never seen a normal ECG in a TAPVC. But having said that, I should also tell you that right axis deviation, right ventricular hypertrophy is a very non-specific ECG which is seen in a number of congenital hearts. So it doesn't tell you that it is TAPVC. I would say it is consistent with TAPVC, but then majority of congenital heart disease, whether it is tetralogy or any other, would have right axis deviation, right ventricular hypertrophy. That's the commonest ECG you're going to get in any congenital heart.
Can we go to the X-ray? Hemlata, next slide, please. So this is the chest X-ray PA view showing cardiomegaly with an RV apex, right atrial enlargement. There is widening of the superior mediastinum, and there is increased pulmonary vascular markings.
Yeah, few more important findings is the first always congenital has to be started with the situs. So here, of course,
somehow this is not clear.
we are not able to see
we need to
funding.
comment on the citus.
So basically, it is a cardiomegaly, right atrial enlargement, of the nephrites, and a broadened mediastinum, which is giving a figure of the reticulus with increased pulmonary blood flow. And probably we can discuss a little bit about what is this figure of 8, what are the other synonyms for this figure of 8, madam?
Yeah, so this X-ray again is very, very typical of supracardiac TAPVC. This will not happen in cardiac or infracardiac TAPVC. This will only happen with supracardiac TAPVC. That too, the commonest type of supracardiac, which is going to the left side. So supracardiac TAPVC can be going to the left side vertical vein, or rarely it can even go to the right SVC or even azygos on the right side. In those cases, if it is going to the right side, you would have only half of figure of 8. You would not have figure of 8 on the left side, but you will have it only on the right side. So this figure of 8 ECG, or snowman's heart as we call it, first of all, it may not develop in the first 3 or 4 months of life. So please do not exclude TAPVC if you don't see figure of 8. Figure of 8 is seen in a very typical ECG, not seen in majority. But yes, as the child gets older, figure of 8 shows. But in a, let's say, 1 month or 2 month old child, even with supracardiac TAPVC, you won't get figure of 8 because it takes time for the vessels to dilate. The components of this figure of 8 are I think very often asked in the exam. So if we start with the left cardiac border, the lowermost part is of the 8. The lower part of 8 is the right ventricle, which is basically enlarged in these cases, and the upper part of figure of 8 on the left side is actually the vertical vein, and on the right side it is a superior vena cava, higher upper part, and right atrium lower part. So these are the parts of figure of 8. And why it is happening? Because the vertical vein from all 4 pulmonary veins is draining into the left innominate vein, and therefore this is the vertical vein which is dilated. And sometimes there is obstruction at the common chamber to vertical vein junction, and that is where it gets even more dilated because of post-stenotic dilatation. And of course, because of large flow also, because all the pulmonary venous flow is going into this vertical vein, then into the left innominate vein, and then into the right SVC, then into the RA. So this is quite classical of supracardiac TAPVC going to the left vertical vein. But obviously, if it is going to the coronary sinus, or if it is going to the diaphragm, below the diaphragm into the portal venous system, it will not show you this particular figure. So X-ray tells you that it is not only TAPVC, but it also tells you where the veins are drained. So it's very, very classical.
Two more the additional names are given for this snowman appearance is the
snowman appearance, where the upper part is known as the head of the snowman, the lower body formed by the right atrium, right ventricle is known as the body of the snowman. That is the common term used for this.
Right. I think cardiomegaly also tells you that there is still a lot of flow, large flow. So for example, if you have obstructive TAPVC in a young infant or a neonate, then you will not have much cardiomegaly. Rather, you would have severe pulmonary venous hypertension. So the lungs will white out, but the heart size will not be enlarged. So that's suggestive of obstructive TAPVC, whereas this is suggestive of unobstructive or a very minimally obstructive TAPVC.
So this is the typical X-ray finding in case of supracardiac TAPVC. What about the other variants? What changes do they produce in the X-ray?
So if you have TAPVC going to the right vertical vein, which is sometimes azygos or sometimes vertical vein to right SVC, then you would not have the left bulge that you have. Left upper bulge will be missing. There will be only bulge on the right side. If we have cardiac,
so that is the half snowman appearance what you are talking about?
That's right. Yeah.
So that means that only the right heart border is seen. The right bulge is seen, the left bulge is not seen.
Right. Left upper bulge is missing. If it is going into coronary sinus, then generally it will not show you anything different than an ASD X-ray. That means right atrium, right ventricle enlargement, prominent pulmonary artery segment, and plethora. But sometimes, rarely, you can actually see the dilated coronary sinus within the heart shadow. We used to depend a lot on that when we didn't have much of echo available with us. But now with the echo, we sort of don't bother to see. But sometimes you can see a shadow running within the heart where the coronary sinus is, because coronary sinus is very dilated in these patients. If it is infradiaphragmatic, which is again a rare condition and seen only in neonates, I don't think a 1-year-old will show you infradiaphragmatic TAPVC because they usually don't survive to that age. But in those cases, they are invariably obstructed and therefore they don't have cardiomegaly, nor do they have any figure of 8. They do have RA and RV enlargement, but then heart size is more or less normal in the X-ray, and there is severe pulmonary venous hypertension because of obstruction. So the lungs are totally white. Very often in a neonate, you might even confuse it with an ARDS or a respiratory distress syndrome. So it's difficult to differentiate the two. So the lungs are quite white, so much so that sometimes the heart border and the lungs cannot be differentiated. So it's all like a white, lungs, as well as the heart is small. So absence of cardiomegaly, severe pulmonary venous hypertension, almost like an X-ray of mitral stenosis, is what you get in obstructive TAPVC, which is often infradiaphragmatic. But again, at 1 year, I would not think about that condition.
Can an enlarged thymus, I mean, in the child at this age, can it present like this, or it can be completely ruled out?
So first of all, cyanotic heart disease very rarely have enlarged thymus. Most of the cyanotic heart disease, thymus gets, goes away very quickly. Especially in a 1 year, you don't expect thymus anyway. But the thymic shadow usually more prominent on one side. That's number one. Number two, it has a globular, edge to it. Like over here, the shadow is merging with the cardiac shadow. That doesn't happen with thymus. It tends to overhang the heart. So it's more like a globular shadow. It may sometimes come even as low as right atrium, but usually it is seen in the upper part. So this X-ray with plethora, with figure of 8 kind of a thing, is very unlikely to be the thymus. Even on the left side, left upper bulge, if you see, you can actually see the lung shadow through and through because it is a vessel. If it is a thymus, you wouldn't see the lung shadow because thymus is a solid structure. So I would not call it at all a thymus.
This is Snowman sign other than the TAPVC, other than the heart. It is seen in the pituitary adenoma. So it is no way related to this, just as a MCQ question I am saying about it.
Should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, please.
So echocardiography is diagnostic. Here we are going to cover only the basic points in the echo. We have a detailed discussion on echo in TAPVC in a separate webinar, which has been done by Dr. Vijayalakshmi Madam. So here we will be commenting only on the basic and highlighting the basic points in TAPVC. So a 2D echo showed a situs solidus with levocardia with 2 atria, 2 ventricle and AVVA concordance. A supracardiac TAPVC with a common chamber behind the left atrium, which is connected to the vertical vein draining into the innominate into the right subclavian. There is a large OSASD with right to left shunt. There is no associated VSD, PDA, coarctation of aorta or pulmonary stenosis. Right atrium, right ventricle are dilated. There is a mild TR with moderate to severe PAH of an RVSP of 70 mm of a G and a good biventricular function.
Yeah, I think because that was more extensively discussed in a separate webinar, I think we can go to the catheterization. Only the few important points to be the seen is the obstructed and non-obstructed, as is, that is levels of how the obstruction to be seen and how the pressure gradients has to be recorded. Everything was quite extensively discussed, and a few of the syndromic associations, because it was not discussed previously, just I want to mention at this time, that is the TAPVC is more commonly associated with the Noonan and the Turner syndrome, whereas the TAPVC is one of the few of the syndromes associated with the Cat's-Eye, Halter-Ram syndrome and Esplenia syndromes. Otherwise, I think we should go much more detail in about catheterization now.
We request all the audience to go to please see the webinar on echocardiography in TAPVC done by Dr. Vijayalakshmi Madam. So we are skipping that part of the imaging in this session. Hemlata, can you go to the next slide? So at this stage, what is the indication of doing a catheterization in this patient? Do you recommend to do a catheterization in each case of TAPVC?
So, if you're asking me, cardiac catheterization is rarely required these days in patients of TAPVC. Earlier, we used to do it sometimes for making a full diagnosis because sometimes all the four pulmonary veins draining into common chamber may not be very easily seen. But I'm sure it has been extensively covered by echocardiography that practically in every child, you are able to make a diagnosis of TAPVC by echocardiography itself. So the indications for cardiac catheterization have remained very few. And one of them is when you have severe pulmonary artery hypertension and you have a doubt about operability of the child. Again, I would not think that's an issue at 1 year of age, like this child, but if the same patient is coming at, let's say, 8 years or 9 years of age, where we see that his PA pressures are very high, as you've shown by echo of 70, and the saturations are also lower, then one would think about catheterizing them. But going by the clinical findings that you've shown us, which is flow murmurs, very, very important. Flow murmurs are very, very important to decide on operability. If we have flow murmurs, if we have a child who's 1 year old, if we have an ECG which shows cardiomegaly, plethora, I think there is no indication for doing a cardiac catheterization in such children because you can get total anatomical diagnosis by echocardiography. If you have any doubt, you can always supplement it with CT angio. We've done sometimes CT angio in some patients where we are not sure if 4 pulmonary veins are going or only 3 are going, and it might be mixed TAPVC. But in majority of the cases, especially under about 1 year, 1.5, 2 years, the echo windows are so good that by the suprasternal notch itself, you'll be able to see the whole anatomy. So this particular patient does not require cardiac catheterization. I would be just keen to know his oxygen saturation that might have been checked, but he has mild cyanosis. So I expect his saturation to be more than 80-85%. And if it is so with flow murmurs, with good saturation and 1 year of age, I would really not worry about catheterizing this child.
So in view of the pulmonary arterial hypertension, as Madam said, actually the need for catheterization is not that, but we would, in view of the severe PH, let us see for the reversibility. So a cardiac cath was done in this patient. The cath data is presented as this. A height of 72 centimeters, a weight of 7 kgs, and BSA of 0.736. Hemoglobin was 15.4, PCV of 48, oxygen consumption of 163. The catheterization course was through the right femoral vein into the IVC, from the right atrium, through the ASD into left atrium, through the right atrium to the right ventricle, to the pulmonary artery for the wedge pressures, from the right atrium through the right SVC, left innominate, vertical vein, and from there into the pulmonary veins. And from the right femoral artery into the aorta, into the left ventricle. So here the ASD has been crossed, and then even the SVC and the left innominate and the vertical vein have been entered.
One question to Anita madam is TAPVC can be done only with a venous access without an arterial, because we have all the saturations and everything demonstration, and by oximetry we can know that the patient is having a deepening of the cyanosis. So is that advisable to do only the venous access?
I think it's very much advisable because in children we are very conservative about the artery. So I would not really puncture an artery. If at all I have to puncture, I will just puncture with a 21 gauge needle and take a sample. If you really want, if you, for example, if you end up doing oxygen study on him because of operability issues, not in this child, but in any other child, then I would just take the oxygen saturation from the femoral artery, just a simple puncture. I would not like to put in a sheath of 4F, 4 French, or put in a catheter. There's really no need. We don't require LV angio. We don't require aortic angio. What we need is basically to define the anatomy and to assess the operability, which you can also assess with right heart catheter.
Do you have any preference of the catheters to negotiate these vertical veins and everything, because they're going to be the very small and easily perforates? Do you think that the routine span gun catheters, rotation catheters will be do, or
so the cardiac catheterization, if you have to do
catheter or anything else in the performance, or routine catheters are okay?
If I understand correctly, I think you're asking which catheters to be used. So I would, if I have to use a catheter, I can use, so I would take a multi-purpose catheter with maybe a glide wire or a hydrophilic wire and enter all the chambers including vertical vein, including the pulmonary vein, and it will be easy. Swan-Ganz catheter is good, but then if you have to enter into, if you have to enter opposite to the flow of blood, as you're going to do over here, you're actually going in the opposite direction. It may be difficult. Swan-Ganz tends to follow the flow of blood very well. So in this particular case, I would use the multi-purpose catheter and use a glide wire and negotiate the catheter over the wire.
Hemlata, can you go to the next slide? So this is the pressure data, the femoral artery pressure 100/60 with a mean of 72, pulmonary capillary wedge of 4, pulmonary artery pressure of 60/20 with a mean of 36, RV pressure of 64/0 to 5, RA and LA pressure of 4, the LV pressure is 100/0 to 6.
So one can see that the pulmonary artery hypertension is about moderate.
Yeah, basically, it shows the normal. Please go ahead, madam.
So it is about 60% of femoral arterial pressure, which is almost into moderate to severe range. But it has a wide pulse pressure, 60/20, which again suggests that he is likely to be operable. Also, if you look at the mean pressure of femoral artery 73 and pulmonary artery is 36, almost half. So that makes it moderate pulmonary arterial hypertension, not severe. RA-LA pressures are equal, which is suggestive that there is a non-restrictive atrial septal defect here. The ASD is non-restrictive. And if you look at the saturations, then we have an arterial saturation of about 84%. And all the other chambers like right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, left atrium, left ventricle, they're all almost same. And that is really the hallmark of oxygen saturation in a DAPVC. So the saturation in all the 4 chambers, pulmonary artery and aorta, tends to be almost the same or within a difference of 2 to 3% only, which is what you are seeing over here. I think one more saturation that I would like to know is of that of high SVC. That means before the vertical vein has actually, or before the LIV, left innominate vein, has actually joined the right SVC, because that will be the real mixed venous saturation. Here we don't have any saturation which is really mixed venous saturation. We have pulmonary vein saturation which is full, which is expected, but the saturation of SVC is already 90%. That means the SVC sample has been taken below the place where the LIV is joining. So basically, we should take a very high SVC or even an IJV saturation or even an IVC saturation to know exactly mixed venous saturation. And that is how we're going to calculate QP and QS. With these saturations, we cannot calculate QP, QS because we are not seeing a step up from superior vena cava to pulmonary artery, because the superior vena cava has already become saturated. So
you said there is a wide pulse. Madam, you were talking about a wide pulse pressure which will determine the operability. How is that, madam?
So usually when the pulse pressure in the pulmonary artery is wide, that usually indicates there is still a lot of flow happening into the pulmonary artery. So this is a good sign. Of course, the pulse pressure can become wide again if there is severe pulmonary artery hypertension, PR, like secondary to Eisenmenger syndrome. But we know this patient is not Eisenmenger. So having a wide pulse pressure is a good thing in patients who look operable. And I think we cannot calculate PVRI over here because we cannot calculate, you can perhaps calculate QP because you have pulmonary vein and you have pulmonary artery, but you will not be able to calculate SVRI, and therefore you will not be able to calculate SVRI PVRI ratio, something that you always want to do that when you're looking for operability. So you have to have a saturation which is mixed venous to calculate QS. So you calculate QS, you calculate QP, and then you calculate PVRI and SVRI. I don't know if you have it in the next slide.
So we need to take another saturation, high SVC saturation. Can the same IVC saturation be used for that?
IVC can be used. The only thing is IVC tends to be higher in children, and therefore you may get falsely high mixed venous saturation. Ideal would be to take sample from above the, high SVC and an IVC and take a mean of 2. That would be really ideal. But I think best is to go above the SVC and just take a mixed venous saturation to calculate QS.
So here there is a wide pulse pressure. The pulmonary capillary wedge is normal, which suggests there is no obstruction. Severe PAH and non-restrictive ASD. These are the things from the pressure data. And from the saturation data, as Madam said, this is typical for a supracardiac type of TAPVC. What are the variants you expect in the saturations?
So depending upon where it is draining, you may have increase in saturation either at SVC level or a vertical vein level like you have here. Or if it is a cardiac TAPVC, then you will not have high saturation in SVC, then you will have it high saturation in the right atrium. If it is infradiaphragmatic, then you will have saturation rise in IVC. Like over here, it's 64%. It will obviously be much higher in that. But having said that, we must remember that infradiaphragmatic TAPVCs tend to be often obstructive. And when they're obstructive, then the saturations are much lower. Here you have a very good saturation of 85, 86% everywhere. But if it is obstructive TAPVC, infradiaphragmatic, then saturation will be much lower, 60%, 70% like that. So you may not get a very good step up. But in a typical non-obstructive TAPVC, you will have a step up wherever it is draining and beyond that. But beyond that chamber, all the samples will be of equal saturation. So if it is cardiac TAPVC, then right atrium, right ventricle, and pulmonary artery will be same. But if it is supracardiac, then even SVC will be high. So it will also tell you where the drainage is happening at.
Is that possible to have a preferential blood flows and you can have a PSAT is more than that an FSAT? Is that possible in this situation also?
Very unlikely, because the mixing is happening at the atrial level. If it was happening at a ventricular level, like in GORV or somewhere else, then yes, you can have preferential streaming. But here the mixing is happening at the atrial level, so both the ventricles are getting the same blood. And therefore, it is very unlikely that you will have PA higher than aorta or vice versa. Usually the difference could be 2-3%, but generally that could be, not more than 2-3%.
Yeah, please go for the angio, please. Catheter position and entered into the common pulmonary vein confluence.
And it has gone into the pulmonary vein. It has gone into the pulmonary vein. Now you can see it is in vertical vein. Go to the next, please. So this is an AP view that you can see the catheter. Right now it is in vertical vein. Next, please. Here again, it has gone into a pulmonary vein now. From the vertical vein, it has been advanced into pulmonary vein. Next. Since it is not running, do you have
Go
any
ahead.
more?
Next. Another one more.
So if I have to catheterize, if I have to do an angio, I would do angio into the right and left pulmonary arteries separately. Why? Because the anatomy becomes much clearer then, especially when you have dual site of drainage. Sometimes the right pulmonary veins are draining elsewhere and left are draining elsewhere. So I would like to do the angiography going into selectively into right pulmonary artery or left pulmonary artery. Here it has been done in the main pulmonary artery, and you can see that there is a common chamber filling in the levo phase from where vertical vein on the left side is filling, followed by left innominate vein, followed by superior vena cava. So that it's quite clear. Only thing is, if you want to see two pulmonary veins on the right separately, two pulmonary veins on the left separately, it is better to get into the branches and do the angiography into the branches separately. The other advantage of doing into the branches is that if there is severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, sometimes these patients can deteriorate as soon as you should die. They will go into apnea. So if you do it selectively into right and left, then at least one pulmonary artery keeps getting perfusion, and therefore these patients tolerate it much better. So in cases of severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, it is not advisable to do angio in the main pulmonary artery. Better to go into right and left separately, give half the dye, and then do the angio. Like for example, here you are not able to see 4 pulmonary veins very clearly. If you were to do in separately in 2 branches, right and left, then you'll be able to see the branches, the pulmonary veins very, very well. So that would be ideal to get into a branch and do right first or left first and then the other. But yes, the anatomy is quite seen, and you should take a very long run because you know it is going to come in levo phase. So you should not stop in between. You have to take a long run till you've seen the entire drainage of the pulmonary veins into the vertical vein, into the innominate vein, into the superior vena cava, and then into the RA, as is being done over here. I think we are left
Can
with
we
just
take
one.
a direct angio in the vertical vein? Will it have an added advantage or something?
That won't help because you are going against the flow. So it's not going to come. It's not going to show you the anatomy. It will never get into the pulmonary veins. It will only keep coming back.
Show you the course of the vein.
So generally we don't do it unless of course we are stenting the pulmonary, the vertical vein also.
Thank you very much, madam, for the lucid presentation. And we gained a lot, and we request you for the next time. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm happy whenever you want.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, madam.